week we're going to talk about petticoats, and I'm going to go over some of the materials and techniques used to create volume and silhouette. It's really important for fashion students or any fashion fan to understand the concept of support elements, not just with these voluminous silhouettes, but with any garments. Everything can benefit from a ruffle under the hem or some additional support. First of all, I like to start with a simple taffeta underskirt, usually with a horsehair hem. The original underskirt will help give it some body and help the skirt to stand out. Even these heavier buckrams and wovens can also be used for those original layers. Then we start with the heavier layers. So we've got a heavy crinoline here, which you can see is very stiff. And then we've got a couple different examples of some heavier netting. This one is very crispy. This one is finer, but also quite stiff. And then we go into the lighter tools that are used for the overlayers. These are the ones that are used to shadow the breaks in the fabrics. Here's a fine tool. Here's what's called a sheer shape, which is a synthetic that has nice body and soft. And then here's a multi-layer fine tool that's stitched onto a band. So this is a very nice thing to use as an overlayer. We also have a piece of silk organza here, which is of course your more expensive, but obviously quite finer option. The other thing I wanted to discuss was boning, which is used in a more structured garment. Here's a section of my book, Draping the Complete Course, which details the use of boning in skirt supports. Here you have a pannier-like look and a 16th century look, which are created totally by boning, which was at that point whalebone, and sometimes wood, sometimes metal. But boning is a very useful tool to create a more structured look or something where you need a little strength. So let's take a look at some of these skirts. This is for the Spell Opera on the life of Benjamin Franklin, One Day in the Life. And this is a diva character from the 30s. So we've got a real mermaid silhouette going with a train. And we've created this effect with layers of ruffles of graduated lengths. So we started with the taffeta underskirt with a layer of horsehair, and then started with the heavier crinoline ruffles, and then on top of those, the softer ruffles. In the back, you can see how what we did was use the heavier crinoline again to start the train, and then the softer ruffles on top of that. Then there was a little bit of a gap here, so I added one more final layer of the tulle, and then on top of that, the sheer shape. Now, the sheer shape pattern is cut exactly from the skirt, so it will create the shape of the skirt and just smooth out all of the little wrinkles of the ruffles. So we're going for a really smooth look, and then we can take our fabric and lay it over and just see if it's working for us. So let's take a look. Perfect. So we can see that this is creating a nice, smooth silhouette. Now, this one is a reminiscent of a late 17th century pannier look, but we didn't want a classic pannier. We just wanted something that was softer in the front and fuller on the sides. So we started with the heavy crinoline. And here, in this case, we started out with a purchased petticoat just to give us a start. And then we started layering these crinoline ruffles. So we have 2 layers of different lengths of the heavy crinoline. And then we started layering it with the lighter crinolines and nets. And then we added these hip pillows, which will create a resting place for the next layer. The final layer is this finer tulle, which is layered onto a band. So we've got our hip pillow here, and then this is going to go on top of that and create a nice smooth surface for the final fabric. This next character in the opera is a sans-culotte, who's a late 18th century revolutionary character. And she's got this very bustled, sort of flat in the front look. She's a bigger woman, so we've padded the dress form to be exactly her measurements. All of the petticoats are built on a yoke, a twill yoke with a Petersham ribbon waistband with hooks and eyes. And then we can build the petticoat layers on top of these yokes as we go along. So we've got the heavy crinoline in the front, and in the back we've got sort of a crinoline pillow scrunched here and 2 layers of the heavy crinoline here. Now we will also swing tack these layers together. We'll talk more about swing tacks later. And then we've got a final layer of the polyorganza on top, which smooths out the sort of rough layers of crinoline that are underneath the bustle area. We've also got one of the little padded pillows under the derriere here on the hip to add to that bustle. And now in the front, we can see that if we put some fabric on here, that the heavy crinoline ruffles are making very unsightly kind of rolls here. And we don't really want to see the details of those ruffles. We want to see like a nice smooth line. So what I'm going to do is take one more layer of the sheer shape actually, and I'm going to place it right about here to smooth out those ruffles. So you can see how this is very much of an experimental process. We're testing the fabrics, we're trying different kinds of weights of crinoline. Perhaps we even try it on the actors and see how it looks in motion, see whether the hems need to kick out a little more, where we might want to add a little more horsehair. So let's try now with the fabric and see if that final layer has the desired effect. Much better. You can see how it's smoothed out that area in the front. All right, so now, next, we have our woodland witch. It's actually inspired by Charles James' 4-leaf clover dress, except we have 5 leaves. And it's built on the yoke again, the twill yoke. And we started with layers of buckram, and then we put a layer of pellon, a big wide layer of pellon around the hem to give those rolls. I happen to know that the original Charles James 4-leaf clover dress was built entirely out of pellon, very stiff. But we don't want a very, very stiff look. We want it to be a little bit soft because it's going to be covered with leaves and vines and look like she's emerging from the forest floor. So we want it to be a little bit imperfect. We've created a boning cage here. We've done strips of boning this way. And again, we've put this layer of boning and crinoline onto a Petersham ribbon so that we could raise and lower it depending on how we want it to fall. The train is still giving us a bit of a problem. We want it to stick out a little bit more. We've got some layers of boning here that we're trying, and we might need to create like one more sort of horizontal boning here just to make this stick out. I hesitate in a way to use things like hoops and boning too much because I like my petticoats to look very sensual and moving with the fabric. I don't want them to look too artificial. So I'm always tending towards using the softer materials. And when you think about it, the original reason for building these petticoats and these understructures is to give the fabric something to lay on top of. All those gowns that were made in previous centuries were beautiful silks and brocades that had to be treated gently. And so they had to have these understructures and petticoats so that the fabric then just laid very gently on top and moved in a sort of sensuous kind of sinewy silhouette. So I don't really like the more false looking things. I like the fabric to tell the story. So those are the silhouettes that we're working on right now. And I think they will be really interesting in their variety on stage for the opera.